coming. I'm just going to make our traditional acknowledgement. Our university is located on Treaty 1 territory, on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe peoples and the homeland of the Métis Nation. The university and the forks of the city of Winnipeg sit at the crossroads of the Anishinaabe, Métis, Cree, Dakota, and Ojibwe Cree nations. So I'm going to introduce our first speaker, who is going to bring comments from the Faculty of Architecture, and that's Karen Wilson-Baptist. Karen is the Associate Dean Academic and Environmental Design Program Chair for the Faculty of Architecture, and she is also an Associate Professor in the Department of Landscape Architecture. Dr. Wilson-Baptist has been teaching design since 2000. Her research interests lie in the realm of emotional geographies, inclusive of memorial sites, cemeteries, rewilded topographies, and post-agrarian infrastructural and industrial landscapes. There is a regional focus within her work, with an emphasis on the narrative character, poetic ecologies, and the multiple transformations of the Canadian prairie. So, Karen?
Thank you.
You may have to speak up with this.
Okay. I'll put on my old cheerleading voice. Thank you very much. I bring greetings from the Faculty of Architecture on behalf of Dean Beddoes, who couldn't be here with us this afternoon. I would like to thank Shelley and thank Margaret in particular for your amazing work in bringing this beautiful, beautiful work back out from the archives. I recall very well where they sat in our building, and it was a very dangerous place for work of this beauty to be sitting. We're lucky that they survived the bowels of the architecture building, and we're very grateful that that they are residing safely now in the archives. The work is beautiful, is luminous. It's incredible to think of the light that each of the images still holds after all of these many, many years in the darkness. We appreciate the wonderful care that you have taken of them, and we're so pleased to see them here where they can inspire our students to similar greatness. Thank you. Thank you.
So now I'll introduce Margaret Janczak. She is the curator of this and the intellectual powerhouse behind this program. Margaret got her undergraduate degree from the University of British Columbia, and she did a double major in English Literature and Language and Art History. She finished her master's in Cultural Studies, she is finishing her master's in Cultural Studies in Curatorial Practices at the University of Winnipeg, and the University of Manitoba Archives and Special Collections has been very fortunate that she is doing her internship with us. So this is how we had the opportunity to bring these works to a broader community. So without any further ado, Margaret.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. It's very nice to see you here today. I think these works deserve the attention that they are getting. I am sorry, this is a little bit heavy texted, but I hope to be able to sustain your attention for a little bit. So thank you for your introduction, Shelley, and I'd like to start with foremost, I'd like to thank you, Dr. Shelley Sweeney, for your guidance, for your generous support and continuous assistance. I wish to thank you for giving me access to these incredible works of art and for trusting me with this project. This was no small feat. This exhibition would not have been possible without you. I wish to thank every person in the archives who supported me with this project, and a big thank you to my supervisor, Dr. Serena Kshavji, who unfortunately cannot be here today, but who made the meeting between Dr. Sweeney and me possible. This exhibit is the result of a conversation I had with Dr. Kshavji about my interest in archives and in looking at archival materials from an art historical perspective. Having been trained in social art history, I have learned that great works of art are manifestations of a particular social, political, and historical perspective. But what constitutes a great work of art? Most of us know that great art, or fine art, has come to be understood as the kind of art that gets the seal of approval from the academy, the stamp of superiority, because it adheres to peculiar ideologies or philosophies of the governing authority. Indisputably so, we are in this moment surrounded by what could be easily considered great works of art. I also believe that the archive, and here I would like to interpose and state that I'm using the word repository, archive as a repository, as it is commonly understood by the general public, but not so by the archivists themselves. So I also believe that the archive as not only a repository of historical documents, but archive as a site of agency and power can play a vital role in enabling visual and textual documents to serve a more active role in how we understand our communities, nations, and their histories. Just because things end up in the archive, it doesn't mean they have to statically remain there. This exhibit is an example of how archives can be used to share historical knowledge through visual/artistic representations and interpretations. So what becomes possible when we start thinking of the archive as art? In the case of this exhibit, of course, the archive is the art. But when we consider the voice, the pencil tracing and the application of watercolor, etc., and then the multitude of influential voices of the architects and the artists who inspired the architects in question, it then becomes a discernible intertext. A text deeply embedded in the art historical/historical discourse. I'm sorry, I have a lot to say, so you might want to sit down. Just kidding. There is one more layer to this intertextual dynamic, the voice of the curator, who, like the archivist, imbues the work with yet another layer of text, the curator's perspective, social art historical perspective in this case. As products of imagination or vision, the best of these architectural drawings, and let's not forget, stamped by the seal of approval from the Academy, fuse together not only the exquisite craftsmanship of architectural design, but also the conceptual and creative thinking of the artist. So let us take a closer look at the first medal receiver, the Dobrusch's Ballroom. Just the vertical painting on this wall here. Everybody can take a look. So Dobrusch produced this image in 1930, the year after the market crash. He offers a fragmented view of a ballroom where decadence and the embodiment of the extraordinary detailed Japanese-inspired murals recede into the background of the design. The fractured view of the ballroom, as depicted in the 3 distinct panels pasted onto an elaborate wooden window frame, is a social commentary on a shattered existence or a palatial lifestyle, or put differently, on better times, simply, that now can be viewed only through a window as through a frame of history or a lens of history, for it is no longer accessible. On a different note, the modern high street and great architecture are legacy of one of the most traumatic times of the Canadian economic history. Charlie Wildman, University of Manchester historian, states that the Great Depression spurred a period of unparalleled creativity, no longer bound by financial considerations. The architects created flamboyant visions of civic and recreational spaces to provide the dejected public with spaces of refuge and from the deprivation of their daily lives. This perspective allows for a particular interpretation of Wallace's rendering of the monumental lobby in a city club, right? On this side here, the second painting. As well as Sheet's restaurant on the water across the room. Sorry about that. So the lavish interior of the lobby, with its intricate Persian-inspired tiles, serve as a kind of getaway from the chaotic and impoverished city. Similarly, Sheet's depiction of the restaurant in a space is a space of refuge and enjoyment. Looking more closely and critically, however, these renderings beg the question, specifically, for whom were these places of enjoyment designed? Who would have been able to afford belonging to a city club or to dine in a restaurant on the water? Or who would have been able to enjoy a respite in a manicured park as represented by Logan's entrance to a city park? I'm glad this gallery is so small, you can just take her around. So the idea governing the City Beautiful movement was the beautification of the whole city so that all people of all social classes can enjoy well-designed spaces. Yet history tells us Winnipeg in the 1930s witnessed economic and cultural detachment of the city's elite, or the business class. The Winnipeg's elite saw itself as clearly distinct from the rest of the society, and their shared leisure activities and social and cultural clubs consolidated their distinctiveness. In order to stimulate the interests of the business class, Winnipeg as a city had to offer places of leisure and entertainment, hence the monumental lobby and the restaurant on the water. The elite of Winnipeg and their British heritage aspired to imperialism and monumentality. By 1938, the ideology of Nazi Germany, especially the notion of the state with a distinct national heritage, took hold in Canada. The appropriation of fascist symbolism in monumental architecture became a symbol of imperialism and power. For example, Logan's entrance to a city park, the last painting on the wall, is really a curious manifestation of the influence of fascist symbolism and nationalistic ideology. Logan's fusion of a manicured park, swastikas on the gates to the park, and the equestrian figure of the indigenous chief Pontiac may well be a social-political commentary on the evolving agitation and anxiety in Europe. Chief Pontiac, mounted on an anxious horse, seems to be ready for battle. The disquietude of the foreground is sharply contrasted with the serene and manicured background. Finally, let us turn to the idea of the metropolis and modernity. The two renderings depicting the movement towards the sky, in Osborne's words, are the office building and the restaurant on the water, just at the back of the gallery. Both artists choose to depict their designs in an evening light, thus point to the building as an embodiment of light. The sunlight can either be reflected off the windows, or the light can be projected out through the glass, as in Sheet's restaurant. Sheet's curious design is an example of a fusion between Le Corbusier's modernism and Art Deco. All in all, the architectural drawings from the 1930s serve as an example of a living archive. For objects, whether in the shape of a text or some visual form like an artwork or a photograph, come to life only when they are used and interpreted. My interpretation of these drawings is a particular one, and by no means the only one. I invite everyone to share your thoughts and ideas about these works, or more generally about how historical and political events impact and shape our visions. And so we have little cue cards that you can post your comment and just sticky tack you can attach to it, and you can glue it on the door. And this is our Twitter, Facebook page. Okay, I am finished. Thank you so much for your attention.
If anybody has any questions, we can take a few questions.
Yes.
Are all the good ones on the wall, or are there more hiding?
Oh wow, no, by no means. These are not the only good ones on the wall. These are, as I mentioned, out of hundreds that the archive actually right now has in their care, these are just a few that I have selected for this exhibit.
I should say that there are 167 just from the 1930s. But this is sort of the highlight of watercolor rendering. After the 1940s, well, during the war, the amount of students sort of plummets, and then after the war, there's this surge of men coming back home, and there's a real encouragement to have veterans go to university. And so the number, instead of being 15 students, it jumps to 48 and 50 and 60 and so on. And so it becomes a far more cut and dried. And you can see it's not necessarily that the quality drops off, it's that the whole approach changes to one that's very utilitarian.
You should mention there's 4 more.
Yes,
Yeah.
there are 4 more pieces just in this series that are going to be shown at the Piano Nobile of the Centennial Concert Hall in May for 2 weeks.
Yeah, mid-May.
Mid-May.
So we wished this space was a little larger to accommodate all 11 renderings, but unfortunately we have what we have, and I think we're lucky to be able to show them here as well.
And I should just add that 11 pieces cost $9,000 to frame. That was just the framing. So it's not an inexpensive activity to do, and we are just really fortunate that we have private endowments and trust funds that allowed us to do this. Otherwise, I mean, we certainly would not be able to scrape out that money from our regular budget to do this. But thanks to people making contributions, that was possible. Any other questions? If not, then I just want to make a couple more thank yous. A thank you to the Faculty of Architecture, who did obviously is responsible for this series of watercolor renderings, and also for their financial support. The University of Manitoba Art Collections, who supported us with advice and dollars. The University of Manitoba Students' Union Gallery of Student Art, and the University of Winnipeg Curatorial Practices Program that brought us Margaret, and the University of Manitoba Libraries. So thank you, and I just wanted to give Margaret a little thank you here.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
And just to say that, well, I was there when they brought we had hired some students on a Young Canada Works grant, and they went over to get these materials, and I hadn't seen them. I don't know, Brian, if you saw them or not.
Not until they came, yeah.
And so we didn't see them until they came over, and like my eyes sort of bulged from my head. It's like, what? What are these? And it was just one after another, and it was just these mouth-watering, watercolors. And so, I was very keen to have them on display. But I think this is just the beginning. This is Margaret's project. Fortunately, she was the first one to be able to do this, but I think that other curators are going to come. And because there are different themes out of the known 167 that we can actually pinpoint to the 1930s, there are many different themes, and so you can people will be doing, I think, displays of these long into the future. So
Well,
thank you very much.
I was just going to the John Russell, those papers that were recently donated. I think, is that Sellers? He
That's
became
right,
a
that's
prof.
Roy
right?
Sellers, yeah.
Yeah.
He became a prof in
Yes, that's
architecture. Yeah.
yes. So he was a student here. He
Yeah.
goes away, and then he comes back to become the dean of the faculty
Yeah.
of what becomes the faculty of architecture. So thank you, Margaret.
You're very welcome. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
This show is on till March 1st, so if you